Hi everyone, I'm Gabriel Lyrio, and we're going to present here Hermetic Philosophy and Sacred Geometry through the lenses of the Fractal Science. And here's my friend Tiago. We're actually the creators of Fractal Science Institute, which is actually a school that teaches the Hermetic principles and sacred geometry and how it relates to a cosmology that explains how all of reality is formed by physical laws, and these physical laws, they are manifest by fractal geometry. And so the basis of the fractal science is Hermeticism and Pythagorean Cosmology. And we would like to explain that Pythagoras actually came up with all of this mathematical knowledge through Egypt. We usually say that the Pythagorean theorem, but actually he learned this theorem in Egypt. So all of the geometry from the Greeks came from Egypt, and they took an entire cosmology from the Egyptians, and they actually based mythology on Egyptian mythology as well. And from this, an entire cosmology emerged based on geometry. So actually, we have the Kybalion, which is a book which is really a basis, which explains how reality is a big mind. And this mind is only present in all scales of reality, and we're all part of the same mind. And actually, this book is based on Hermeticism, and it explains 7 cosmic laws. These laws are mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, and generation, which is gender. And Pythagoras, he actually created this cosmology, which it's called the quadrivium, which is based on a triangular number, the number 10. And it's called the tetractys. And he explained how all of reality is ruled by geometry through arithmetic, geometry, music, and cosmology. He explains that all of reality is ruled by laws of vibration, and vibration actually expresses ratios in all scales of reality, from the atoms to galaxies and beyond. And I want to let my friend here also talk here.
So through our researches, we perceive that Hermetic cosmology expresses subjective perspective or geometry. So it correlates to geometry and offers us to a new perception of imbalanced perception of how geometry works in our reality. And so we can understand better how it actually functions. And the quadrivium is composed by these 4 disciplines: arithmetics, geometry, music, and cosmology. So we can see how it all interconnects. These disciplines are only one science, and through Hermetic cosmology and teachings, we are able to see and understand how these disciplines directly correspond to geometry, to music, so we can understand this harmony, how is it outside of us and at the same time inside of us, and with everyday actions and choices and within everything.
So you gotta understand that the Pythagorean cosmology is hugely influenced by Hermetic cosmology, which comes from Egypt. The law of correspondence explains that what is above is similar to what is below, and what is below is similar to what is above. That means that all scales of reality is ruled by the same laws, the laws of vibration. And this law actually explains that fractals are omnipresent in all of reality, because actually fractals are expressions of vibration. All vibration expresses a fractal dynamic, fractal rhythm, fractal polarity, and also this principle explains that reality is like a mirror. So what is inside it's similar to what is outside and vice versa. So it actually also explains our psychological states, our inner states. So this cosmology is not only a mathematical cosmology that explains physics, but also our minds, that our minds actually manifest these principles of vibration. So if we want to understand ourselves and the universe, we need to understand this basic principle of vibration, which is actually universal, and creates all of reality.
Yeah, it also expresses as within, so without. So everything that is within us, our inner self, is being created outside of us, in our outside realm. So it's amazing to see how everything is following this law.
And so the law of correspondence describes the holographic principle of reality. And a long time ago, many cultures used to explain this holographic principle through different myths. One myth, it's called the Indra's net of jewels, which is actually a Vedic myth, which says that reality is like a big web which has dewdrops in it, and each dewdrop reflects all of the other dewdrops, and so reality is like a big mirror. So this explains the holographic and fractal principle of reality.
Also correlates to James' presentation, and he said like we are in the medium scale of the biggest scale and the smallest scale in the world, so it follows that.
Alright, so what is a fractal? A fractal is a self-similar pattern which recurs at all scales of reality. So a nice example of fractal is a lightning bolt. It has this ramification pattern that looks like roots, looks like trees. If you look at our veins, our nervous system, you're going to see.
Thank you. So you can see that all of nature expresses this ramification pattern, and this is due to the energetic laws of efficiency. Energy actually moves through the path of least resistance, and it creates those ramification patterns. So there's this quote here from Walter Russell: "We're all electric creatures floating in the electric sea of this electric universe." So reality is actually manifest by fundamental forces, and these fundamental forces in mainstream science are known as electromagnetism, gravity, and the strong and weak nuclear forces. But there's in the Hermetic Philosophy, we say that there exists only one substance. So actually, all of these forces are manifestation of only one force, and we say that this force is light, because reality is electromagnetic. So we know that electromagnetism is light, and light can be converted into electricity, magnetism, motion, heat, and life itself. We know life would not exist without light, so we exist in an electromagnetic universe made of light. And electromagnetism expresses itself through fractal geometry. So the entire reality manifests these types of self-similar patterns, where every part is a reflection of the whole. So we're like cells of a giant organism or a giant mind.
Yeah, that's a clear proof of the correspondence law. And then
Thank you. So this is the clear proof of the correspondence law, and we can define fractals within mainly three categories of autosimilarity, and it can be like very autosimilar and quasi-autosimilar and statistic autosimilarity. And you can see fractals everywhere in the world, in the biggest scales and the smaller scales, and it follows these principles of electromagnetism. And we are seeing here only asymmetric patterns, but we're gonna show that symmetric patterns as well are fractals in nature, and we can see it and we can learn from it lots of information.
So you have to understand that fractals are not only geometry and structure, but also processes. Because if we are fractals, our behaviors, our mentality, our emotions are going to manifest fractal patterns as well. So you're going to see more about this. So here's a blob. It's a fungi, and it actually manifests a fractal behavior, and it manifests in this way to search for food. And there are videos on the internet where you can find blobs going through labyrinths and finding the best ways, the best paths to get the food. So it is manifesting this principle of energetic efficiency.
Yeah, scientists are studying these patterns
And figuring out how to create cities in more balanced structures and technologies, so we can learn from nature. This principle of fractality is expressing most efficient patterns, like creating roots that are connecting to what it needs. So here is an example. You can see that, yeah, our veins look like leaves. So fractals are not only beautiful and mind-blowing, but they're useful. And they're actually omnipresent in all sciences, and they actually help us manifest efficiency in any science. You can see this list here is a really small list compared to the applications of fractals. So you see neuroscience, psychology, medicine, engineering, biomimetics, biology, anatomy. It's a really huge list, and this is because reality is fractal. Science is fractal. We organize information through fractal patterns because our neurons are actually fractals. So literally everything in our lives manifests those patterns. And as I said, they're absolutely useful. The great thing is that fractal geometry is a new knowledge. Actually, it's eternal, but only in the middle of the 80s that Benoit Mandelbrot discovered it and how it works in a digital environment, and it can repeat infinite patterns and show us lots of information, mathematical constants, and how it relates to several processes in nature.
So here we see the comparison between neurons and the cosmic web. The cosmic web, it's billions actually, of clusters of galaxies, and they express this fractal behavior. And it's really interesting to know that our neurons actually resemble the universe, but we're going to explain that this is not only a similarity, there's also a similarity in function. So take a look at the pattern in the middle. It's actually a map of science, map of lots of science interconnecting itself, and they actually manifest this fractal behavior. And in right, there's the two superclusters of galaxies, and they're actually, as you can see, they're fractal. They look like a river or lungs or maybe a brain. And on the left here, it's Laniakea, which is actually a supercluster of galaxy in which the Milky Way resides. And you can see there's like a mirror symmetry there of Perseus Pisces, which is another supercluster of galaxies. So you actually live inside of this. So you're not just in a random reality. Reality is actually pretty structured, and it looks like an organism. So the universe works like a huge brain, and this was discovered by a physicist and a neurosurgeon. Both of them, they're Italian, and they compared actually the dynamics of the cosmic web and how our neurons and our brain works and they saw a huge similarity between the dynamics of the cosmic web and of our brains. So it's not just similarity, the process of the universe and of our brains works in a really similar way. So the Hermeticists and the alchemists from the past, they used to say that we live in a big mind, and mainstream science is just catching up. So it's not just some weird theory from primitives of the past. This is a really advanced science.
So those are two really recent from 2020 paper, and they are both proving like the mentalism, the law of mentalism, and this correspondence of our brain dynamics with the dynamics of the biggest structures the man know. So fractals are mostly basically organizing structures, and they are showing us the most efficient way to make patterns in the world. I'm gonna explore this.
So you see that we're not living in a dead universe, we're actually living in an intelligent universe. So here it is, the principle of electromagnetism. Electromagnetism is universal, and we know that evolution can only exist because of electromagnetism. Atoms can only bond themselves because of light, because of magnetism. Without this force, nothing could exist. And actually, all of our senses are actually electromagnetic. Our brains actually hallucinates this reality, simulates this reality through electromagnetism. Our bodies are bioelectromagnetic. If it wasn't for electromagnetism, our minds could not exist. And actually, we see a really small spectrum of reality, like less than 1% of reality is actually perceivable. There's an infinite electromagnetic spectrum, and this proves that reality is actually a big sea of electromagnetism, and we can see here some examples in this image that really everything follows electromagnetism. And there's this famous quote from Nikola Tesla which says that if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. So the Hermeticists and the Pythagoreans, they were really talking about physics back then, and they already knew the laws of vibration back then, and that is really interesting to know that by only studying mathematics and geometry, you come to understand the laws of physics. So here again, an example that light, the colors that we see, they express a vibration. Every color has a wavelength, and yeah, literally all of our senses follows laws of vibration. Our hearing follows vibration, our touch, our desires, pain, everything that we experience is actually an expression of these laws of vibration. Really a universal thing. So everything is energy, we know this, and there's the equation of Einstein, E equals mc squared, and it says that all matter has an energy correspondence to it. And energy expresses vibration, and vibration can be described as frequency. Frequency can be expressed as numbers, and numbers can be perceived and organized as forms and patterns. And we're going to see some examples of this. This is not just some theory.
So that's the thing, that when we see that our visible spectrum is so little compared to the infinite spectrum that actually exists, but through geometry, which is the visible form of energy, of vibration, we can learn how to recognize these patterns beyond this visible spectrum that limits our perception. So we are limited by our five senses, and the visible senses and spectrum comprise some data of what we are perceiving. So materialists perspective is really guided by only by vision. So I only believe on what I see. So through geometry, we're going to understand beyond these limitations of this spectrum.
So materialists only believe what they see, and we see less than 1% of reality. So they're. So, was mathematics and geometry invented or discovered? Well, there are mathematical constants in nature, and they're popping up everywhere in all scales of reality, as we said, from the atoms to the galaxies and beyond. And we have some examples in here, and Robert, he loves constants, you guys know it. Pi, Euler, and Phi, they actually are ruling the laws of physics. So all of the fundamental forces of reality are expressing these mathematical constants, and all of the symmetries and asymmetries in reality are expressions of those constants. And we have some examples in here. The Fibonacci sequence is a growth number pattern, which is actually describing how organisms are growing, how flowers actually, we were going to describe this in another slide. And the fine structure constant, it's a number which relates to the golden angle, the golden ratio, and this constant actually describes electromagnetic interaction. So you see, if reality is really electromagnetic, it is actually being governed, all of reality is being governed by those constants. Another example that I like to give to demonstrate, to prove that geometry is actually a property of nature and that we didn't create geometry. There's a concept that is molecular self-assembly. Atoms, they automatically generate molecules through geometric patterns. And so we didn't create tetrahedrons, we didn't create pentagons and hexagons. They naturally manifest in reality, and this is actually an expression of physical laws. So all of these sacred geometric patterns that we see, humanity didn't create them. We perceived in nature, we saw how these patterns are omnipresent, so we started to respect those patterns in a divine way, because we understood that geometry is actually eternal. It is a property of reality. That is why many cultures in the past compared geometry to divinity, said that geometry is actually sacred. So here's an image. This concept here, it was discovered by Robert. All mathematical constants emanate from the golden angle. This is one of the most mind-blowing information that I have seen in my entire life, because it actually connects amazing pieces of the mathematical puzzle. So this number, 137.5, the golden angle, it is actually connecting all of reality. And it is because electromagnetism is ruled by this constant and reality is electromagnetic. We have some examples in here. Take a look at this. If we take circles and we put circles inside other circles, and when they start cycling around the circumference, they start creating geometric patterns, and it doesn't matter where you are in the universe, nesting, cycling circles will create geometry. So we can see the relationship between the harmonics of cycles with geometry. Geometry is actually manifest by laws of cycles. Vibration is ruled by those cycles. And the frequency of those cycles creates specific patterns, as we can see here. And it is interesting because the Pythagoreans, they said that reality is like a big circle. And through a circle, we can actually create all kinds of geometries. And really, there's a concept, which is the monad, which says that reality is like a sphere or a circle. And through the harmonics of a sphere, all of reality is manifest. So it's really interesting to understand that cycles within cycles are creating geometry. And another interesting thing here is that chaos theory states that what is apparently random is actually ruled by laws of mathematics and geometry. There are patterns even in randomness. So reality cannot be random because randomness can be explained by fractal geometry. So fractals really explain everything. Even what seems random is ruled by fractals. Here we have some main geometries of sacred geometry here, and pay attention to the names of these geometries. The seed of life, the tree of life, the fruit of life, flower of life, they're all actually fractal patterns. All of these, we know that trees are fractals, so this is a metaphor for how reality is made by fractals. And all of the sacred geometry emanates from spheres and intersection of spheres. And actually, a circle is just a 2D projection of a sphere. And we're going to understand this, we're going to learn this. Want to say something?
So those are the most efficient shapes we can create when we correlate things in nature. So when we intersect two circles, we create the vesica pieces, and all the geometry and constants in nature come out from this simple symbol, which is the eye of God, or the womb of the mother. So all the universe comes from simple mathematical rules.
So here we have some examples of the golden ratio in nature and in ourselves. The golden ratio actually is omnipresent in all scales of reality. We see the golden ratio in our face, in our body, in our whole body, in our DNA. And actually flowers, they arrange their petals, many flowers arrange their petals according to the golden ratio in order to absorb the light of the sun in a proportional way in all the leaves, and also for the water of the rain to spiral in all the petals. And actually we see the golden ratio even in the orbital relationship of pattern of planets. So it's not only in our DNA, in flowers, but also in the cycles of the planets. So it's really an omnipresent constant that's really in all scales of reality. And so you see that there's a direct relationship between the golden ratio and fractals and the formation of geometry and biology.
There are so many other patterns in the world that are ruled by this. So we just want to give you a quick overall of all these things. And we're gonna explore a little bit more because there is so many other things, and everything we're showing here are interrelated. So all the fractals, all the spirals, and all these geometric forms, like symmetric geometric forms that we showed the slide before. But
some more examples of the golden ratio in nature. We can see the relationship of a pentagram expressing the golden ratio everywhere. So this pattern here is a cut, a 2D view of a DNA molecule. It expresses a decagon, and we can actually see a pentagram inside of it. So it expresses the golden ratio as well. Wanna talk something? So here are many patterns in nature, both symmetric and asymmetric, and all of them are ruled by constants. So even what appears to have no structure at all, to be random, is actually manifest by constants, mathematical constants, and we can actually plot constants on graphs on computers, and we can actually recreate the natural patterns on computers only through mathematical constants. So this is a proof that really the patterns in nature are expressions of these mathematics.
Yeah, and by that we can see that geometry is the model that can help us understand every other discipline, every other subject in nature, such as biology, chemistry, astronomy, everything, single thing that is in nature, that pops up from nature, we can understand better from geometry, and give us like a model and ability to associate the knowledge within these disciplines, So, yeah, we can see this like chemical patterns in nature on the skin of animals and structures of ramifications and fruits, plants. And Alan Turing was one of the great discoverers that wrote a book called The Chemical Basis of Morphogenesis, and he predicts like using some of diffusion reaction chemical patterns, and he could describe all this fractal geometry in nature. So even our brain is compared of like skin patterns of animals and cactus and something like that.
So more examples of symmetries in nature here. So electromagnetism follows a geometric pattern which is called a torus, and this torus is scalable in all scales of reality, from atoms to planets, galaxies, and beyond. So what you're seeing here, it's actually magnetic fields seen from above. Here's a pole of a magnetic field. It expresses this toroidal pattern, and when we see it, let me play this video here for you guys to see the 3D torus. Can you guys perceive it? So it looks like an apple torus. And this pattern is actually in all scales of reality, and it is creating all of the cycles of reality. And the modulation of this torus creates many kinds of symmetries in all scales. So if reality is electromagnetic and magnetic fields follows toroidal patterns, then this pattern is omnipresent in all scales of reality. And planets are only cycling forever because of these patterns. This pattern allows motion to exist. And this motion actually creates all of geometries in nature, because geometry is actually just relationship of motion. Without motion, geometry cannot exist. So motion and geometry, they're like reflections of one another. Here we have this is an excerpt from David LaPointe's Primer Fields. It's a really interesting documentary. And here you can see two magnetic balls, and he's throwing metal balls between these magnetic balls. And it is creating symmetry in here. We can see a triangle being created, then a square, then a pentagon, then a hexagon, then a hexagonal grid arises. And you guys may know that the flower of life, it's a hexagonal grid, and around these magnetic balls there exists actually toroidal fields. And what is making this symmetry is the toroidal field. Without the toroidal field, these patterns would not exist. And Buckminster Fuller, he described the synergetics, and we can see the closest packing of spheres happening here and generating this geometry. So actually all of the symmetries we see in molecules actually arises from this electromagnetic interaction. So this is actually how molecules form geometry. So you can see the flower of life superimposed in the pattern here. And from the flower of life, we can extract the 5 regular polyhedra, which are 3D solids, and it was proven by an actual engineer and chemist that all of the elements from the periodic table, they emerges from the Platonic solids. And we actually saw that the flower of life emerges from toroidal patterns, so we can actually understand the relationship between the torus and the formation of all molecules through this phenomenon that you guys just saw here.
So we didn't show here, but all the Platonic solids come out from the flower of life through cycles outside of it. So you keep growing outside, keep adding circles, and then you're gonna get to some point that you're gonna create the Metroton's cube, which is that symbol in the Gabriel's shirt that we showed before. So you can extract these 5 regular polyhedra from it, and it's showing us that every single element in nature, every single thing is coming out from this symbol. So we are demystifying this symbol. We are showing how simple is that, and how the most basic forms in nature can be explained by this form, the flower of life. And that's why it's so sacred for many cultures, and we're gonna show a little bit more about that.
So Plato, thousands of years ago, said that all of the elements from nature emerges from these elements, and like 2,000 years later, it was proven that really all of the elements from the periodic table emerges from this. So by simply studying geometry, we learn eternal concepts. And we have to remember that Plato learned this geometry in Egypt. He didn't come up with this. So yes, it's really mind-blowing.
Just a little comment. It's not only the 5 Platonic solids that come out from this symbol. It's actually all the geometric forms, even higher dimensional forms. So you are seeing like through a 2D symbol, which is why we perceive this like in a simple form, but it's actually infinite dimension goes on. So we see through a 2 dimension only for understand better what is happening.
So we see that nature actually naturally manifests here. Hexagonal grid, a honeycomb is a really nice example of energetic efficiency. So
yeah, the most basic polygons are that can fill a plane, like we call tessellation, that we can fill a plane is triangles, squares, and hexagons. But the hexagons are the most efficient because they have wider angles, 120 degrees of angle, so it can store more energy without losing, so it shows efficiency in nature. So that's why bees and snowflakes and every single pattern in nature follow these geometric patterns, and we actually can see, I think we're gonna show it, I'm gonna spoiler you.
So we see the toroidal pattern encoded in many different cultures, and as we already saw, the torus is a manifestation of magnetic fields, and there's an example here as well of a cymatic pattern manifesting this toroidal pattern, and we're going to show more examples here. So we can see here the omnipresence of the torus in all scales of reality, around humans, around galaxies, and there's a direct relationship between the torus and the flower of life, and there's a geometry which is actually called the cuboctahedron, and also the vector equilibrium, and this is actually the straight lines version of the flower of life, and this is like the skeleton of the torus. If we superimpose a vector equilibrium on the pattern that we saw in the primer fields experiment, it fits perfectly as well.
So I don't know if you guys got it, but the torus is a system. It's not a static pattern. It can get like a donut shape or an apple shape, and it keeps moving depending on its frequency of the components. And by adding rotation to the flower of life, in 3D we can see that model of torus. And every single cell has a toroidal field, an electromagnetic field, and we actually are creating this coherent field with our heart. Our heart is the most powerful, energetic tool of creating electromagnetic fields. So how we feel, how we, express our thoughts, our emotions, are literally creating everything inside of us, and we can affect everyone around us as well, and everyone can affect us as well. So we need to take care and take attention of it, because we are actually creating torus, and our system is more powerful when we are in a state of coherence. So we're gonna talk more about that as well.
So we have examples here of the straight lines version of the flower of life and the round version of the flower of life. So the flower of life is not just a 2D pattern, it's a higher dimensional pattern, and it's a system that is actually manifesting all of reality through a process which Buckminster Fuller called the jitterbug, which is this ability of the vector equilibrium to transform itself. And so literally all of reality is manifest by these laws of space-time, and they're actually formed in the geometry of the flower of life. So you want to explain?
Jamie actually showed us this relation of the cuboctahedron and the...
Oh, thank you. Yeah, Jamie showed us a little bit of this dynamics and the relation, the fractal relation and holographically creation of the cuboctahedron vector equilibrium and the 64 tetrahedron grid, which is the isotropic vector matrix that Nassim Haramein is working.
So here's an excerpt from an awesome documentary that changed my life called Thrive by Foster Gamble. And here's an example of the 3D flower of life. So the flower of life is not just a 2D drawing, it's actually a higher dimensional system, and we're seeing here an example in 3D. See the vector equilibrium and the torus around it, and the activation of the vector equilibrium forming the 64 tetrahedron grid, and the flower of life emerging. And now we see the flower of life in the Osirian temple, two flower of life beside one another, and we're actually going to see this probably tomorrow, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Some examples of the torus here. Take a look at this. Here's the seed of life. We create the seed of life by intersecting some circles, 7 circles, and if we multiply those circles and rotate it, they form the form of the torus as seen from above, just like as we saw in the magnetic poles of in the primer fields experiment. So actually the flower of life is encoding the geometry of electromagnetism and of space-time.
And that proves what I said before, that a torus is a system that it follows certain relations of the frequencies, right? So it can shift its shapes.
So this here is a pattern of a star around a supermassive black hole. This is called the Schwarzschild precession. And this motion was predicted by Einstein in his general theory of relativity. So all of reality is forming mandalas in all scales because of this fundamental forces of reality being formed by the flower of life, which is actually this toroidal shape. We have some examples here of relationship of orbital patterns of planets as seen from Earth. So actually, if you pay attention to the relationship of the orbital patterns in all of the universe, they're drawing geometry. So it's like the universe is like a huge mandala. It creates mandalas in all scales.
That's all about resonance. So you can search more about that by searching of the term orbital resonance. And these are not actually very, very accurate, but it's a mathematical model that can show us the ideal patterns that actually are ellipses, right? You know how you know about that, but we are approximating here these patterns so we can see how the order comes out from nature. So we can see like polygons and spirals and go to the other slide so we can show like 24 patterns happening right there.
And also the
Wow.
Hindu cosmology already described this phenomena thousands of years ago, and they used to say that reality is a mandala, the universe is a giant mandala. And yes, we have proof of this when we see the orbital resonance of planets forming all of this kind of geometries. So we can see the same type of geometry in the reflection of light in cylindrical objects or circular objects, as we see here. This pattern is called a cardioid. It's also called the heart of mathematics. And if we make a circular modular arithmetic, which is actually a multiplication table around a circle, we can actually reproduce many types of geometries which are analogous to those geometries we see in the orbital patterns of planets. So different types of multiplications around the circle will create different types of geometries. And actually there is a formula for this mathematical reflection around the circle. So actually light, the reflections of light, is following really ruled mathematical principles of geometry.
Yeah, this is very basic form for us to see that mathematics is showing the dynamics of light. So you can see here when you put a cup below a light source, it will form the cardioid here. And a microphone can be set as a cardioid microphone, so it gets the sound in this shape, you know. So sound as well following this principle. What is the Mandelbrot set as well?
Yes, the Mandelbrot set is a fractal pattern which is actually manifested by some algebraic equations, and it actually manifests the cardioid as well. So we see the omnipresence of this pattern in all scales of reality.
That phenomena is called acoustics in optics. And you can see light forming these patterns, and the more sources of light, it will become like another multiplication table. The cardioid is a true multiplication table. I mean, you multiply the numbers around the circle times 2, and then you're gonna get this pattern. It's so simple, as you can see.
So here's some examples of cardioids in the line of symmetries of bilateral beams. Actually, the mirror symmetry of beams that manifest this reflectional symmetry. So we actually can see the cardioid in our body right in the line of symmetry. Yeah.
It's not only in these places, but all the line
Yeah.
symmetry, it's following these principles. When we have like the lateral symmetry, we're having this middle, we're having this cardioid happening, and yeah.
On the penis as well, we can see a cardioid, but we didn't want to put it.
We didn't see enough of that today.
So, the logo of Fractal Science is nesting pentagons, and not only orbital patterns of planets creates nesting pentagons, but actually cymatics, which is actually the science of visible sound or the geometry of vibration. If we take the nesting pentagons and we superimpose over a frequency of cymatics, we see that it fits perfectly. And we have some examples here of, we already showed the DNA cross-section forming the decagon and the pentagon, and the water resonance creating pentagons, and as we already showed here, orbital resonance, and so yeah, vibrations creating symmetry.
For those who don't know, cymatic is the science of visible sound. So we can see the patterns forming from frequencies. So we can use a system, so we can send frequencies to a cup of water or a dish with some powder above it, and then we're gonna show us these patterns. So here is an example, right? It's forming pentagons inside of pentagons, which is a fractal relation, and we can see this, and the molecular patterns in water, and the resonance of carbon and water, and so on.
Yeah, so symmetry is manifest by just resonance. So different frequencies creates different resonant patterns and different geometric patterns. So here an example, nesting pentagons. More examples here. We can compare the symmetries of vibration of sound in water, creating symmetries really similar to flowers.
And there's a nice point here, which is the spirals are made of rotating polygons. So the triangle, the right triangle that Robert was showing us yesterday, can be understood how the patterns of spirals are coming out from simple right triangles as well. And we can see here this pentagon spiral forming this shape of spiraling plant.
So if you find some kind of app that enables you to create polygons on a computer, and you start adding more sides to the polygon, eventually you're going to create a spiral like this. So spiral patterns in nature are like a polygon with many sides, and eventually it creates a circle. So it's like a circle, it's a polygon with infinite sides. So here we can see cymatics in real time, vibration generating the geometry of a sunflower, and it expresses the golden ratio. So we're actually seeing vibration creating the golden ratio, which is actually a omnipresent pattern. So you can perceive here the direct relationship between mathematical constants, symmetry, and vibration. Another example here, we can see hexagons forming. In this video, there's actually also pentagons forming, but in right now you can't see. But the full video is like 40 minutes, but here we can only see the hexagonal pattern forming. So another example of symmetry formed by cymatics.
Yeah, so the resonance of the water with frequency is showing out these patterns, and these patterns are reflections of the light source that are both from it. So these colors are added from the light source, right?
So this is not CGI, it's just vibration in water forming this geometry. Here an example, another example of cymatics on the right side forming the geometry of the flower of life. And if you pay attention, when we intersect circles, we create geometry. So it's like when vibration is radiating, it's creating spheres, and when the spheres intersect, they create many types of different symmetries, and eventually they create the toroidal pattern.
And it approximates to a sphere when it adds more and more.
And
Yeah.
if you pay attention to the center, it's creating many kinds of patterns really similar to orbital patterns of planets. So Pythagoras and Plato, they used to study geometry, and both of them knew about the Platonic solids. Pythagoras studied the 5 regular polyhedra before Plato, and they, as I already said, they were saying that these are the basis of all of the elements of reality.
And Pythagorean Cosmology, which it comes out from quadrivium as well, it says that the real education comes out from remembering, because all this knowledge is part of ourselves. It's already within us. So we need to remember this and try to learn without putting what you already knows, because this is a whole simple thing, simple way that we don't learn in education, normal education, you know. That's a shame, but we need to approach this with like curiosity. And Plato said that if a man neglects education, he is failing to the end of his life, and that's why it makes philosophers passion for the knowledge.
And we have to remember that both of them learned geometry from Egypt. And Pythagoras, he really loved triangles and pyramids, and maybe he got this love of pyramids in Egypt. So we here have more examples of mathematics in nature. When people say that mathematics was invented, just show them examples of division, multiplication of cells. They actually follow the binary sequence, and actually asymmetric division of cells manifests Fibonacci numbers. So we actually have proof that Fibonacci is a manifestation of nature and that we humans did not create it.
Yeah, and if we use that in our technologies, we can check your cell phone or your computer. It uses like this doubling sequence to storage things and to give the resolution of your screen. So it's showing that the most efficient shape that nature uses is useful, very useful for us. So we need to learn that so we can apply for our technologies, for our everything.
So the tetractys, the number 10, which is a triangular number, has a direct relationship with this Pascal's triangle. And there's a relationship of the Fibonacci sequence with this triangle as well, the binary sequence. And there's a game named Name of Chaos, right?
Chaos game, yeah.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah, this Pascal's triangle is related to the Sierpinski triangle, which is a form of fractal, right? And this is showing here quantum physicists like approach a piece of carbon monoxide to a copper surface, and it showed just this pattern of Sierpinski triangle, and it's a fractal form, and it relates to the Pascal's triangle. It's a form that we learn in school, which is encoding Fibonacci sequence in the binary sequence. It correlates to Alan's work as well.
Sonnets.
The sonnets, yeah, exactly. And it's the tetractys as well. Pythagorean tetractys, right?
You wanna explain the chaos game?
Yeah, the chaos game, it's basically if you add like a space that we choose 3 points. If in this case of triangle, you can use like another forms as well. And you roll dice within this space, and randomly we're gonna create this form. So, showing that random actually is not random at all. If you have a space, defined space. We actually don't have this video to show here, but we can search Chaos Game on YouTube.
So we actually see polygonal patterns in all scales, and here's an example of the North Pole of Saturn showing a hexagonal pattern with a spiral within it, and we know that the North Pole is magnetic, and it's actually magnetism that is forming the hexagonal pattern. So another proof and relationship between electromagnetism and polygons in all scales of reality. So the flower of life is found all around the world, as Jamie already showed to us, and all of these different cultures, they understood that this is actually a divine pattern because nature is manifesting this. It's not just a random drawing or art created by humans. It's actually a pattern from nature, and we should respect it as something divine because nature is divine and nature is creating this pattern.
You need to understand and to associate these symbols, the flower of life and the hexagram or the Star of David. They are just the same pattern, but this one, the hexagram, has straight lines, which shows like masculine energy, and the flower of life shows feminine energy, which are curves, but they are the same.
This is a nanographene molecule. If we superimpose the flower of life and Metachrome's Q, we see that it fits perfectly. And we know that carbon is the molecule of life. Without carbon, life could not exist. And carbon actually forms a hexagonal pattern. So it is when we say that hexagonal pattern is related to the creation of life, when we say the flower of life, this name is not in vain. It really relates to the creation of life.
The science is showing us the interconnection of classical mechanics to quantum mechanics, because we are gonna see like microscopic patterns and correlates to all the biggest patterns in the world.
So this is a graphene molecule, and graphene is really useful. It is the most conductive material known to man. It is the thinner material as well. It's 200 times stronger than steel. It's transparent, flexible, and it's the first 2D material in the world. So we see that the hexagonal pattern is really efficient in engineering, and so the flower of life is not just a beautiful pattern related to religion, but has efficiency in many types of sciences and engineering.
You see this very old knowledge, like eternal knowledge, is leading us to a future. It's leading us to showing us that we actually are still learning. We have so much to learn with this. It's a simple concept that will lead us to more complex stuff.
So this is a small list of the applications provided by graphene, and we can only have these applications because of the hexagonal pattern. If it wasn't for the hexagonal pattern, we could not create all of this. So we could create internet that is really fast. We charge batteries in 10 seconds with the graphene material. So it's really an amazing property of chemical bonds. To when we use graphene, we could revolutionize all of the science and engineering. And so you see, really, it's really important for us to get to know the hexagonal pattern and know how it relates to this flower of life. So when we understand the fractal cosmology and its relationships to hermeticism and sacred geometry, we learn to understand that everything is connected, and this helps us to understand the unity of reality helps us to respect each other and empower ourselves with a better worldview and less catastrophic worldview, because nowadays people are absolutely disconnected, nihilistic. They think reality is random, has no meaning at all. But when we learn to understand the order of the universe, this order helps us to order our lives as well. So the science of Hermeticism and sacred geometry helps us to connect everything and to see reality in not only a more beautiful way, but more efficient way as well.
Yeah, so sacred geometry help us to acquire lots of new knowledge, because we can associate this knowledge, right? And help us to build neurons, paths, like the neuroplasticity thing that we have in our brains. Neuroscience shows us. And help us to deconstruct limiting beliefs, because we got stuck in that mentality that we are fruit of something that we cannot control. We are determined, predetermined, but it shows us that we can create every single day, every single moment, a new pattern that will get strengthened, strong, and we can grow by this as just planting seeds of life by every choice, every thought, every emotion that we're creating. We are growing by this, so we can get better fruits for our future.
Here are some examples of the technology we can obtain with vibration, levitation through acoustic levitation.
It was ultrasonic levitation.
But not only we can levitate water droplets with vibration, but here's an example. Rocks being levitated through sound.
Those are some mind-blowing experiments that we can correlate to maybe how the ancient Egyptians figure out to build their structures.
So the science of vibration is not just an abstract concept, it's actually useful as well. And also cutting stones through vibration.
Those are homemade devices, so it's just showing us how simple it would be if we had like effort to build bigger structures like that. We're gonna make some huge advances through our buildings, through our constructions, through our technologies.
So we see that the principles of Hermeticism, sacred geometry, and fractal science are really useful, not just beautiful and mind-blowing, but it can help us to revolutionize all aspects of our lives, in the inner and in the outer. And that's it, people.
Yeah, so if you guys like we hope you guys. Thank you so much. We hope you guys have enjoyed. If you have any doubts, we'd like to thank you, Robert, for inviting us. It's
Boys from Brazil. I love these guys. They're so awesome. Thank you so much for, what an amazing presentation. Let's hear it again one more time for you guys.
I think that was probably the best presentation I've seen in like one sitting, right, of all those different aspects of Hermeticism and mathematics and geometry and physics and ancient structures and stones and all that. Really, that was a fantastic compilation, so I'm so proud of you guys. Very well done.
Actually, you summarize a lot.
I can't believe we worked together so much too for the last few years. We never met until now. So I'm so grateful for that. And thank you so much for sharing all of my work to all of your followers. You know, it's been amazing. And I just am very, very happy with how all this has gone. And I'm most happy that you got to experience this in Egypt. So
So happy.
Having this transcendental experience, and it's really an honor for me to be working with you, spreading your work, because I mean, you helped me to understand many of these principles without I didn't understand the direct relationship between the mathematical constants with physics. After I watched your entire course, I started seeing these relationships, and it really helped me. So thanks for existing.
Thank you guys. I'd like to thank Gabriel for being such a great guy that helped me a lot to understand better the science as well, and we help each other a lot. And Robert, you are a great man. You are leading us to a great future. We are really, really, really honored to be here and to work with you and to make this everything happen. And you know, like, we're just living this because we are truly passionate about it. And we believe with the bottom of our hearts that it's gonna be an amazing journey that we hope Alan, Jamie, and every one of you guys are being with us by this event. And Mohammed, it's a really pleasure to meet you all, guys. Really, thank you.
thank you.
I enjoyed the lecture in a very high level, but the last part,
That's a bonus.
and this is what I was going to show you in the Komombo temple, the levitation of the temple. So these guys have made it first.
No, you're gonna show us.
So now when you sit in the temple, we have now the scientific proof. It is not going to be just Muhammad's story. So can I include that part?
Yes, yes.
In my next presentation, I will depend on use you as a source.
We can send out you the link of these pages.
Great job, guys. And
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I want to make a quick announcement. At 9 o'clock tonight, we're actually doing a simulcast with Unify, which is a large global organization. I think they have about 1.8 million members or something like that. We're going to do a live broadcast to them. The faculty is going to be up here on the stage, and you're all welcome to join this as well. We're going to talk about what we've been doing on this trip. It's also going to go to all of our pages, which we have about probably some overlap, but between our 3 pages and all of our social media presence, we have another 2 million or so followers. So basically, we're going to talk about the new discoveries in the Great Pyramid that we've basically made. We're not going to show any pictures or anything like that. We're just going to talk about it and the experiences that we've had this week. We're not posting the pictures, as I said to you guys, of the stuff we found. We've also found more things that I haven't even showed Mohammed yet. There's stuff that we found